Well, I got the faceplate off, and the faceplate actually is in really good condition, but all of the metal caps came off of the plastic pieces for all of the push button covers. And this one was just sitting in there and it was broken off. But I did find the piece that was stuck inside the button. So I'm going to try to repair that first. So we'll have to see what we can do to make that repair. Okay. So here's what I'm doing to fix this. I took a really tiny drill bit and I drilled really crooked using the vise, just put it in there, drilled through the center of it. And I have a little piece of wire that I'm going to use. Like this, I'll rough it up a little bit with some sandpaper. And I'm going to take some glue and I'm going to run it through like this. I drilled all the way through. And you can see it just kind of comes out over in the corner there. I'm going to fold it over on both sides and I'm going to glue it together. So I'll have not only just a glue connection but a solid mechanical connection. Hopefully that'll be enough to hold it. I don't know, but we'll keep our fingers crossed, huh? Okay, we have one of those good news, bad news situations. The good news is this repair worked out pretty good. The bad news is the little catch for the switch inside is broken, or should I say misaligned. Now I did a video, I think it was when I did the restoration of that Fisher stereo. It was either that or maybe one of the other Marantz, I'm not sure, where I actually disassembled one of these switches and I showed you all. There's this little metal wire, it's like a little clip, and it kind of toggles back and forth like this in the switch. And there's like a little V-shaped notch that will ride in. So when you push this in, it kind of toggles over and grabs the catch and holds it in like that. And see that? And then when you release it, it moves over and back into the middle and releases. And what happens is there's an internal spring and an external spring. Now you can see the external spring right here on this thing. And there's another one inside the switch when you push against it. And they kind of push back and forth against one another. And that inner spring will get caught on that little wire that toggles back and forth, that little, L-shaped wire. And it makes this not work smoothly. Like if you look at the one next to it, you see how nice and smooth it works. This one is kind of a little bit stiff. It doesn't mean that the switch is broken. 9 times out of 10, when it does that, it's that little catch is sticking on the internal spring and you have to adjust that spring. It has to be like up over this little plastic lip. And it's easy to fix if you can get to the switch. But the bad news is, again, the horrible, terrible design of this stereo comes into play again. I can take these 2 screws out and I can remove this, pull this whole board back a little bit. But because of the way it's wired up, you have wires going in from this end and from this end, and then on the front you just have these massive bundles of tight wire going in, and like the standoff for the tuning dial up here is in the way. All these wires wrap around and go down, they go down this way along here. You can see them. You have another bundle down here going. There is no possible way that you can get this out without completely gutting everything. And I'm just not going to do that. If I could get the board out, I could fix that switch better than it is. But it's working right now. It's a little bit stiff. It's the stereo mono switch, so it's probably not going to get used a whole lot. I don't want to risk damaging anything more than it already is. Right now I have a perfect example of this receiver with the exception of that mono switch. And I have it working. I do have the front shaft of it repaired and it looks pretty good, so I can put the button on it. It'll hold up. It's nice and tight. I'm going to leave sleeping dogs lie. But it irritates me because, you know, Marantz made stereos for many, many, many years before this model came out, and they totally dropped the ball on this. They just pretty much, this is a statement, I don't really care if you can fix this thing or not in the future. And they just make things very difficult. But Tony's ranting again. I got to stop that. Let's get back and do the good that we can do here. So I have the tone control board out, and you can see there's not much going on this. There's a few transistors. I'll check those. Some capacitors to change out, and then we'll clean the controls. And like I said, I always just do some quick dry, no residue contact cleaner, and then I follow it up with just the tiniest amount of fader lube, and these will last a very long time. So I'm going to do that, and once I get that done, we'll come back. Okay, the board is all recapped. Controls have all been cleaned. Stick this back in there, and we'll be good to go. And I'm going to start moving over to the phono stage. Okay, this one shouldn't be too bad because you only have 10 capacitors on this board. The transistors are all good ones that probably won't give us any trouble. And this selector switch that just needs, we'll put a little bit of contact cleaner lubricant on there, and it should be good to go. And the nice thing is, for a change, everything's right up front here where we can get to it, so it shouldn't be that difficult to remove any of these parts and put them in. Alright, now the capacitors are replaced in the phono stage, and I cleaned the switch and everything. So other than the tuner, the entire receiver has been recapped and serviced and everything, and we're down to the tuner section. And again, in the spirit of trying to do things with as little of test equipment as possible, we'll see if we can figure out how well this tuner is working. And there's a few things you can do to possibly determine if the tuner is working okay or not, but you're never going to be able to know everything without some test equipment. It's just kind of no way around it. But we can get an idea. So the first thing I've done is I've attached an antenna, and it goes outside to an outdoor antenna on top of the roof of one of my storage sheds. And it's actually for the 2 meter amateur band, but 2 meter is close enough to the FM band that it actually does a pretty good job also picking up FM. And so what this will do, it's kind of a rainy, overcast day today. It's in the afternoon. It's about 11:30 in the morning, so it's really not the afternoon quite yet. But we should be able to receive some stations down here. So I'm going to turn this up. And what we're going to do, I'm going to try to, I've kind of moved the camera around. What I want you to do, I'm going to shut this light off so you can see a little bit better. I want you to be able to see this meter right here. And as I tune through it, it's just so many reflections here. As I tune through this, I want you to pay attention to this meter. It's very hard to see everything in the screen, but I think you can see it. So let's turn this up.
Of your own inside.
And the stereo indicator is right here. So you'll see as we get onto a stereo station.
And you're dragging that.
And I'm not going to make it real loud.
Okay.
And see, we're now tuned onto stereo. Now watch when I go past it. And what happened to my lights here? Okay, that was quite strange. The panel lights went out in that last shot. And what it turned out to be was, on the schematic, you have this little tiny circuit. There's your 8 volts AC comes in through this F702 fuse, through the diode, through a resistor, and then it gets filtered with this capacitor, and then it goes out to power the lights. And as it turns out, this fuse was bad. It reads, but if you see, the end is just falling off loose. And it was just intermittently making contact. It had resistance from that. And when it would vibrate around or move, it came up. It would disconnect. And the only thing I can figure is the glue that holds the cap onto the glass just came loose and just wiggled the filament loose. Very strange. So I popped a new fuse in there and everything's good to go now. So who knows? Okay, back to our tuner here. I think you can actually see the dial a little better with this other light on, so we'll leave it like that. And here's the thing. Now, here's what I want you to do here. Here's what we're going to do.
And so
you can hear the station.
I talk a lot about loneliness. We talk a lot about loneliness.
And what we really want is actually, we want different types of stations. We want stations that are real strong nearby. We also want some faraway ones that have some multi-path interference. And what we're trying to do is I'm going to center the dial until I can audibly hear the station as clearly as possible. In other words, I'm going to disregard the meter and I'm going to listen till I hear a clear station. And then I'm going to look up at this tuning centering meter and see what it is. And I'm also going to look at the signal strength meter, and I'm going to try to see that if the signal strength meter is, peaked, will this be centered on its center? And will I have stereo? This will all make sense as we do a couple stations. So here's our first one.
Next step for you, based on your
and that's a pretty strong station. Now I'm going to roll through it a little bit. I'm going to back this up so you can see the dial. Okay. Now watch. And you see how I'm rocking through it? So right there it's centered. So I can find the one edge here. I can find the other edge here. See that? And this is a mono station, by the way. And you can see up here as I go off of it, this will drop. Okay. Now, if you notice, the tuning meter is not centered. Okay? That does not mean that it's out of alignment. Because, again, multipath interference can throw this off. This does not have a multipath filter in it. So, let's look at a couple more stations.
Don't wait. Pre-order your copy.
Okay? I can't keep this on for very long. But if you see the station there, see how we've kind of peaked it out there? And we have the stereo beacon, and this is a weak station. So when I hit the edges of it, and the stereo light drops out like it's supposed to, but you can see the tuning indicator is still off. Okay, let's go to another station. Okay. All right, so that one's pretty close. So you can see the process of what I'm doing. I'm looking at strong stations and weak stations, and I'm looking at when I center the dial over the station where I can find the edges, the upper and lower edge of that station. I want to see A, is the tuning meter peaking out, and B, when I'm right over the center of the station, do I have the center tuning on? And in some cases I do, and in some cases I don't. Now remember, multipath interference and things and adjacent stations and everything can throw this meter off, so it's not always perfect, but this can give you an indication of how it's tuning. The other thing is the sensitivity. You see how many stations I'm getting. Now, I know my area, I know the stations around here, so I can kind of tell as I'm tuning through these, if the tuner is acting like it should. If the tuner is deaf, if it's the reduced sensitivity for what it should be, you can tell that because a lot of the stations that you normally would be able to tune in aren't there. And so just by paying attention to what's going on here, you can get an assessment of whether the tuner is working properly or not. The other thing is, when you're centered over the station, does the audio sound clear, or do you hear distortion in it? For instance, when somebody says the letter S or something like that, do you get that sibilance, that instead of S, it sounds like sh instead of s? You hear an SH sound. That sibilance is a sign that possibly your detector is not properly centered over the center frequency of the tuner. And when that happens, you'll get that weird sibilance. I'm not hearing that. It sounds pretty clear. When I'm centered over a station, I can hear the static, the interference and the multipath, but the audio in the background is good. And if I get on a really nice strong station, or one with no adjacent channels around it, now
99.7. Here's Alicia Keys.
and see 99.7, and you can see I'm over 100. So my dial accuracy might be out a little bit, or see here S. See, it sounds pretty clear over here. I don't know if the microphone can pick it up or not, but I think our detector is set properly. But look, I'm off center a little bit, and definitely the dial accuracy is off. Okay, now you can see I'm centered over that one, but the meter is not centered. Okay, so a little secret. In most of these tuners, the way that they work, this tuning meter will have its own slug in the detector circuit. So you'll have an upper and lower slug, and you can actually just fine tune the one slug that's for the tuning meter and bring this on center. So if you see a trend that good stations are always tuning off center like this, then you can get onto a really good station, that's really strong, high signal, get it centered, by checking the band edges and get it centered over it, get a good stereo indication, and then use that adjustment slug to move this into the center. And that's a good way, to do that. And the thing is, you're only moving one adjustment, and you should only move it a tiny little, maybe an eighth of a turn one way or the other. It's never going to be a whole lot out unless there is an actual problem with the tuner. That should be the only adjustment you'll need to make in an instance like we're seeing right now. The other thing now, the dial accuracy, if I did not have the proper test equipment, I would leave sleeping dogs lie with that. It's going to be a little bit off, where it should be, but I would leave it. If it's tracking the same amount off across the board, you can always, let's turn some lights back on. You can always go in here and just move the indicator a little bit. You can see how it's just held on there by a couple of little clips and some glue. And you can soften that up with some alcohol, some isopropyl, and then you can just move this ever so slightly wherever you need it. Sometimes that's all you need to do to get your dial accuracy on, as long as it's tracking. Now, if it's off at the lower end of the band and it's on at the higher end of the band, now you're talking about you really need to have test equipment for that. But again, you'd be surprised, this generation of equipment that's made in this era, it doesn't drift very often. Unless you have a physical problem in here, very rarely will you have to adjust and mess with the alignments. Sometimes, like the stereo separation or the pilot detect indication, Those will go off a little bit, and the only reason those will go off is because those are controlled by resistive potentiometers like these little pots. And these pots can go bad. These are pretty high quality on the Marantz, but some of the other ones, like the Pioneers and things, they use those open frame kind of Bakelite, Formica, whatever you want to call them, pots. Those go bad. They wear out, they get loose, they don't make good contact. Sometimes you can clean them, sometimes you can't, but that will cause those things to go out. So for instance, your stereo separation or the pilot detect. So if the stereo is not, it's not always picking up the stereo indicator and so forth, sometimes that's all it is a bad pot. And you can tell that by just, putting your adjustment tool on the pot, just touching it. And just by touching it, you'll see it'll go crazy. The stereo light will come on and off, or the stereo sound will get wide and then close in like mono again. All those things you can just check by simple things without actually moving anything. This can here, usually if you look for the one tall silver can on the whole tuner, and this is pretty across the board, the Sansui, the Marantz, Kenwood, Pioneer, all of them. Most of them from this generation, that aren't using synthesized tuning and all that, they'll have this, and this big tall can will be your detector for FM, as well as your tuning indicator, your on center indicator. And it's usually the top slug will adjust the tuning indicator, the bottom slug will get you on center frequency, but not always, okay? But just giving you a couple things, and you should have the service manual to make sure when you're looking at these things. But these are a couple little things you can do without risking getting the thing so out of whack that you can never get it back again without test equipment. And usually those are the only things you'll ever have to touch on these. You recap them, like these orange capacitors. I'll replace the orange capacitors in here and a couple things. And this thing will be good to go for a long time again. They don't really drift, especially these ones that have the integrated circuits, like your multiplex circuit for the FM and everything for stereo. They're handled all on one of these integrated circuits, so it's all an internal thing. You can't even adjust them. They just work, and they don't very often fail. So there's another indication of how to deal with this. Now, if you have the proper test equipment, then you can do a more advanced alignment. This one's probably not going to need a whole lot done. It might need the center indicator. And again, you can get a known good station that's strong and stereo, and you can go ahead and you can adjust that center tuning based on that. But if you have a piece of test equipment, a signal generator, you're better off. So let's see so basically what I think the tuner is properly aligned, but I think from looking at this, it looks as if the dial accuracy is off by a little bit. And I think it's probably going to be off across the board, but we'll verify that. And I really think that you just need just ever so slight adjustment of the center tuning indicator. And we'll know now. We're going to hook up test equipment, and we're going to see how good we did guessing all of this. Okay, so here's how we're going to handle this. I'm just going to unplug the antenna, and I'm going to plug it into the signal generator up here. I'm going to turn this thing on, and I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm just going to set it to a station that I know that we can tune on. I'm going to take this down to 98.0 megahertz. And I have a really strong signal right now because I just want to see where we are. I mean, right now it's at 500 microvolts. So that's a fairly strong signal. And then I'm going to go over here. And again, this is just to see where we are, if what we were guessing is correct. So 98 will be right here. You can see it. Let's center it over the 98, and I can turn this up now, and you can hear it. And you could see I have like a couple of peaks there because of how strong the station is. You can see right there. And there's when it kicks in stereo right there. And there it drops off. But you see how strange the edges of the station are? So you can see that tuning indicator just isn't doing what doesn't seem right, does it? All right, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to just go, I'll just move you over here for a second. I'm just going to take the amplitude and I'm going to drop it way down. Okay, now we're down to about half a microvolt. It's pretty low. And you can hear I'm still picking up, I mean, there's a lot of static, but you can still very clearly hear it. And you're not going to get stereo indication now. But now let's see if we can center it even better. It's gone there. There's the edge there. Hear that? Let me hold it next to the speaker. See that as I'm moving it? Let's go back even further. You can see all what I'm doing here. Stupid camera stand. So right there, I'm pretty well centered. So I'm centered right there. And you can see very clearly that that's out. Now let's see if we have a double peak. Okay, so I'm going to come back again here. And I'm going to go. Nope. Nothing there. And there's nothing there. So right about there. And you can see it's off. So that tells me, and if I turn the amplitude up, it gets really clear now. And if I go even a little more, I get stereo. So that is the center of the frequency, and this is not centered. So we would need to adjust the center tuning. Okay? And again, I haven't even looked at the service manual or anything. But let's see if we can adjust this, if it'll stay good like that across the board. Okay, on this one, I believe the top slug is the detector. The bottom slug is going to be for the tuning meter. So I'm going to take an alignment tool. I'm going to put it in here. And I'm going to listen. I know it's a horrible thing to listen to this tone, but... And it shouldn't change the sound at all, because you're just adjusting the meter. So now I'm centered. See that? Now the camera's angled up a little bit, so it'll make this meter look a little bit off this way. But looking straight on, I'm very well centered right now. Okay? And now if I go off one direction, if I go off the other direction, see that? And I'm centered. And you can see the signal strength is holding up real well. There, get you. And as I go off, it drops. If I go the other direction, it drops. I'm centered. Okay? So that's how you center it real quick. And again, I never even looked at the manual on this. I've never done an alignment on one of these 2252s, although I'm sure it's the same as a lot of the other Marantzes I've done. But that gives you an idea of what's going on. Now, if you're getting that sibilance on the S's and so forth, you can usually clean that up by adjusting the top slug. But again, be very careful where the slug is when you start. so that you can always put it back. You know, put a little tick mark on your alignment tool or something in some way to give you a point of reference, and then don't take the alignment tool out until you're done doing what you're doing. That way, if you get it screwed up, you can put it back. You never should have to rotate that thing more than, you know, like this or like this, just a little bit. If you're turning it more than that, you have another problem and you're just throwing things out of alignment. All right. Now, I have not taken care of this problem right here. In order to do this, you need a very accurate signal source, and you need to be able to align the capacitors for the one end and the inductors of the oscillator for the other end. And by doing that, you can make it track accurately all the way across the board. Now, a quick way to check this out is if you know some local stations, you can just tune around to those local stations and center over them now that you have your center meter set right, and see if it's off the same amount across the board. If it is, you can move the little pointer on this with respect to the string. If it's not accurate, then again, you're going to have to use test equipment. And again, you're better off just leaving it a little bit off and not worrying about it. But anyway, let's do that. I'm going to go up to 100 and I'm going to go 104. I'm going to go to 104 megahertz. Okay, I haven't changed anything. I just changed my signal generator to 104. And if this thing's off across the board, it'll be a little bit past 104. It'll be like 104.2 or 104.5. So let's turn this on. And see, centered the meter. It's centered, that's good. And we're the same amount off. You're just ever so slightly past 104. So, you know, at a lower end of the dial and a higher end of the dial, and I can go to the extremes if you really want to check it accurately. You want to go to the extremes, like go to 88 and 108. And if it's off the same amount like that, you can just adjust the little, you know, the string, you know, where the pointer, how it mounts to the string. Okay. The other option on this one, if it's the whole thing's off, is up here. Let me move the camera again. I have to raise the camera. If you look up here on the tuning gang, you'll see there's two screws. And as long as you do not move this at all, don't move the fins, you know, the whole tuning gang, you can loosen these two screws on this shaft and you can just move the whole thing. It'll move the dial pointer and then tighten these set screws back down. Some of them you can do that on, some of them you cannot. So it just depends. You know, some of them have like a D-shaped, you know, like an indexed key that you can't slip it on there like that. But this one you probably can. Okay, so I just cracked these loose. We're going to do that method. I cracked this one loose. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this without turning the tuning gang. Okay, I'm going to listen to make sure it doesn't go off station. I'm going to make sure we stay on. And then I'm just going to rotate this whole thing and watch the dial. Let's see if you can. I know it's going to be small because I'm turned back so far, but I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm going to just turn it like that until it's right on. All right. And then I'm just going to tighten it back down. Again, this is kind of the way you have to do things if you don't want to interrupt anything a whole lot. Okay. And now I'm like pretty much right on. Now I'll go down to 88. So let's go down to 88 megahertz. Okay, I'm at 88.0. I'm going to go all the way down here. I'm right on. So that did it. That got it. That's it. Simple as that. Our tuner is aligned and I'm not going to mess with it anymore. Now you can do all kinds of measurements, and you've seen me do that, and a lot of you get frustrated at that because when you start doing dB measurements and you start using test equipment and using a stereo generator and all that, you say, hey, I can't do that, and it's true, you have to have the test equipment, but you can do the same thing again using a known radio station. You just need a couple of them, one at the upper part of the dial, one at the lower part, and you can do the test that I just did. Being the mess that this area is with stations, it's hard for me to get good reception down here at the bottom of the hill where I live. So, I use my test equipment just to make it easier, but that's it. Now, I know some of you are going to say, how did you know what, how do I know on my stereo, where those adjustments are? Well, again, what I gave you were some general rules, and they'll be most of the time, looking for the big silver can, that's your detector, and your dial centering adjustment. Not every tuner is the same. Yours may be different, but a lot of them are like this. And if you have the schematics or you have the service manual will tell you what the adjustments are, where they are, but it'll show you how to adjust it using test equipment. But if you substitute some of those techniques I just showed you and use the service manual to locate that adjustment you're looking for, you can still do it. Well, I'm going to end this part right here because the restoration is complete. I'm just going to put everything back together. When you see this next time, it will be completely assembled, and the last video in this series is going to involve testing everything. And in this case, we won't be using minimal equipment. I will use my full artillery of test equipment. We're going to go over all the different things, check it from top to bottom, make sure everything's good. And this one will be ready to go to a new happy owner. All right, so till that time comes, I wish you all peace, joy, happiness, and good health in your lives. And we'll be back real soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.